So Jennifer has been working on environmental issues, energy issues, water issues in China for several decades at this point. And I would say she's probably one of the leading scholars, practitioners in the world of Chinese environmental politics. She has a Ph.D. in public policy and comparative politics from Indiana University and a BA in Germanic languages.
Yeah, figure it out.
From the University of Illinois. There are some publications at the back of the room that Jennifer brought from the Wilson Center, so folks should feel free to grab some, but she has been the editor of the China Environmental Forum, which is a yearly publication that comes out yearly, and I would encourage people to look at their website. It's available online.
Yeah,
everything's online. And so the only other thing I want to do is just give an update on the next 2 environmental institution seminars so folks know what's coming. On November 2nd, we will have Jonah Bush from Conservation International, who will be speaking about Indonesia's moratorium on palm oil concessions. And then on November 9th, we will have Eric Nelson from Bowdoin College, who will be speaking about modeling land use change and impacts on biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and crop production in the United States. So I will turn this over to Jennifer as she moves back up here.
Yeah, make sure I got my propaganda there.
Okay, great.
Okay, so I have control now?
You have control. It's all yours.
All right, and where are these people on the screen?
Marine Lab in Beaufort.
Hi, Beaufort. Woo! We'll do the wave together. I'm really excited to be here. So I've been, the easiest way to think of me is I had the global mafia on energy and environment in China. Okay, I've been at the Wilson Center for 13 years, and the Wilson Center, are you guys familiar with the Wilson Center? No. It was created by Congress as a memorial to Woodrow Wilson. He was a scholar and a policymaker, so we bring those 2 worlds together. We have Asia program, Africa program, Middle East program, but my program's unique because I focus on energy and environment in China. And I serve the practitioners around the world, which includes people in academia, so welcome to my mafia. We're a nonpartisan, non-advocacy organization, but we are knowledge for action. That's our new motto, which I'm very excited about. Because in the China Environment Forum, I've been really lucky. I have the best job in D.C. I've been able to empower movers and shakers, not just in China, but people who are working on China on energy and environment. NGO folks, government researchers, business folks. I'd like you to kind of know my background, so when the time comes that you're free to interrupt me, you let me get through 5 slides at least, okay? And so over the years, I've done a lot on water. My dissertation looked at water policy implementation at a local level in China. I was looking at local center conflicts and how is it local governments are so powerful in China. And then when I started at the Wilson Center, I've done some exchanges on river basin governance, water conflict resolution, but there's this thing called climate change, right? They're big on energy, and so over the years, I've had to become more fluent in energy issues. And about 5-6 years ago, I started wondering why no one in my network, again, I have the leading NGOs in both countries and around the world, no one was looking at the water-energy nexus. How are water and energy interacting? Because I knew they were, beyond dams. And so there's a group called Circle of Blue. It's an NGO based in Traverse City, Michigan. It was created by some journalists who were very concerned about the global freshwater crisis. And it's an amazing website. And those of you with the computers, don't go there now because I'll be there. You went there, didn't you? No? Okay, good. Just check. Later. But they have an amazing website. They work with scientists, they gather data, and they produce narratives that tell the stories. Because data is good, but if you don't have a story that helps people understand the problem, there can't be as much action. And they did a study a couple of years ago called Choke Point US that looked at how energy development in the US, how it's impacting water. And it was a story that no one had really been telling. You're seeing it now. They were ahead of the curve talking about shale gas before Gasline came out, right? And so I was excited when I saw this, because I've done a few multimedia stories with them in China. And I said, can we do Choke Point China? Looking at how energy is impacting water. And they said yes. So I'm here today to tell you the story of Choke Point China. You ready? Okay, former kindergarten teacher here, I need some reaction. Yay, all right. If I can handle kindergartners, I can handle Duke University. All right, if we're going to talk about water energy, just a couple points because not everyone in the room is a China. How many people do China energy or water or environment? Okay, there's a you're like, okay, that's good. So, but most of you have heard that China's been going through a green revolution, right? Doing lots of investment in wind, solar, energy efficiency. In fact, they've invested a lot more in the past few years than the United States has. And they produce most of the solar PV panels. We're having a trade war with them over that, but that's another story. But they've actually, the 11th five-year plan, ended last year, now we're in the 12th. 11th five-year plan had these ambitious goals to decrease energy intensity by 20%. I mean, this is in the fastest growing country in the world, right? And they actually did it. Environmental authoritarianism. It can be good. And so they became more energy efficient. They installed a lot of wind power, but there's a little slippage, right? A couple of years ago, 2009, 30% of their wind power farms weren't even connected to the grid. Oops. So the cart ahead of the horse kind of thing. But, that's being addressed. They are the researchers from around the world doing pilot projects on carbon capture and sequestration. China is seen as a laboratory to bring clean energy technologies to scale and bring the price down. Green revolution, right? Just nod. Kind of say me, right? Challenges, though. Who's been to China? Raise your hands high and proud. How's the air in China? It's terrible, right? Last December I was there, and I've been going to China since 1987. I was a Yingyu Lao Shi. I was an English teacher. 2.5 years. Also in Taiwan. Yeah, I used to know a little Taiyu, but not anymore. Pollution was bad as I was living there in the 80s and 90s and went back and did my dissertation work. But when I was in Beijing last December, I was shocked. Pollution to your shoelaces, the smog. And there was a big hullabaloo. Our U.S. Embassy was did you guys hear about the twittering the PM 2.5, pissing off the Chinese government? But then Chinese NGO activists were going out and renting personal air quality monitors. And so people were measuring it, uploading it. Some Harvard University students, why didn't this come from Duke? They did have you heard about the KITE program? They did this little air quality monitoring with kites. We're putting up a research brief on that tomorrow, where it was teaching people just citizen science, do it yourself. We're like, okay, you don't trust the Chinese air quality stats? Fly your kite. So basically, green revolution, the skies are black, so I say it's a gray revolution. And we know that air pollution doesn't just stay in China, right? In fact, let's say one point to make really clear. China is not Las Vegas. China is not Las Vegas. What happens in China doesn't stay in China. Well, air pollution seems really clear that comes over here, right? But also there's stuff. All right, if we took everything out of the room that was made in China, what would this room look like? We would be naked. It's quite embarrassing. But so, what happened in China, the good and the bad and the in-between, China's a huge country. They have a global impact. But also, even though the United States has Las Vegas, we are also not Las Vegas. What happens here doesn't stay here. Particularly, we're thinking about energy. We are impacting the global market, climate change, So I want to make sure, particularly for my Chinese friends in the room, that no one thinks that I'm like pointing the evil finger at, it's the Chinese doing the bad stuff. And in thinking of solutions, U.S. and China are the two countries that really, I feel, personally, should come together on these energy and environmental stuff. We've got seats up here. Unless you're afraid of me, you could come sit here if you want. Come on.
I'm a shy lad.
You're shy. Don't worry. I don't hurt too much. But now here's the thing. Does China's water problems impact the globe? Does China's water problems, and you're going to learn more about, does it impact us? This is a question for you to answer.
Yes.
With substance. Yeah?
Yes.
How?
They need to buy food from elsewhere, which is basically importing water.
Beautiful. Embedded water and food. How else? China's water problems. They've got massive shortages, a lot of pollution. You'll get more details in a moment. Here in North Carolina, does China's water problems matter to you? At any level? Yes, sir.
Using water uses energy, it changes the cost of fuel.
Very much so. That water, in fact, big story I'm going to tell you today is about the water-coal confrontation. China can't often get it, it's coal. A lot of energy shortages in China because of that and transportation bottlenecks. So what do you have on the east coast of China? Major hotels and factories all have diesel engines. So when they can't get that coal, they flip on that diesel. Global diesel prices going skyrocketing, severely impacting our truckers. You have like truckers somewhere, you know about the trucking industry here, that diesel is skyrocketing, and it is linked to China's water issues. There's also, what was my other one? Oh, China's waters are quite polluted. You've heard that, right? Polluted waters flow to the oceans. China's coastal waters are ostensibly dead, which has meant that Chinese fishers, you can't really fish there. So they've been going elsewhere. And there was just a news story last week that said that 80% of China's fishers who are working in the South China Seas are going bust because with the Chinese, with the Koreans, and the Japanese, and the Vietnamese, the ecosystem, it's gone bust. They fished it dry. So yeah, so there's other issues, but we'll go into more. I'm sure we'll come think of more as we move on. Choke Point, China. I told you about my friends at Circle Blue, these really clever and smart journalists who I got to send to China in December 2010. It was very fun. And just so for the record, we call them researchers. And they are researchers. We had 4 teams covering 10 provinces in 3 weeks, gathering data. And what excited me, see, my mafia, my network is strong. We've got good connections. And so when I send my friends, to my U.S. friends, to my Chinese friends, they help them. But I was shocked how excited my Chinese colleagues in the energy and water sectors were to help Circle of Blue. Because what's cool about Choke Point is that no one had ever gone to the Chinese before and said, how is energy impacting water? We go there all the time asking other questions, but the water energy nexus is one that issue hadn't come up. And I'm happy to say, I think, that's not very Chinese to brag, but we've kind of put this issue on the map in China. So we gathered, my friends got access, they got into coal-fired power plants, they got coal-to-liquefaction plants, coal mines, and inside this. Where is this man standing?
On coal mining.
Nope.
Is that one of the pipelines for the North-South water transfer?
South-north.
South-North.
Wow, she's done her homework. This is the world's largest water transfer project. In fact, it's probably one of the largest infrastructure projects in the world. Mao Zedong said way back in the 50s, I guess he was standing at the Yangtze River, said, the South has a lot of water, the North doesn't. Maybe we should move some up there. That's all it takes to inspire a Chinese engineer. They've got a tattoo, Nothing's too big. Right? So it took many years of debating whether or not they were going to do this, but the eastern line is constructed, right? So the Yangtze River, moving water north, because North China's dry. Gets about 20% of the country's water. You've got these big cities. You've got coal up in the north. You've got agriculture. 40% of corn is grown in the north. 20% of all their grain in the north. And these cities that are gigantic. Middle line will come online next year. But what interested me is that when we interviewed the chief engineer of the South-North Water Transfer Project, because we said, okay, the western line, I'm sorry, but it's kind of crazy. Because you're going to drill through mountains, huge embedded water, right? You're going to cement and pumps, and you're going to take it, it's going to come here, far western China. Why would you do that? He said, well, we got to get at the coal. China needs coal, and some of the best coal is in northwest China in Xinjiang, and there isn't the water. And that blew me away. So that's why on the little postcard that I passed around, the South-North Water Transfer Project, she's my poster child for the water energy conflict in China, because they need coal and you need water to get at coal. But and how much coal? China's the #1 producer and consumer of coal. Between 2000 and 2007, they doubled their coal consumption about 8 years before they were supposed to. They're going to double it again by 2020. And one way that they plan on doing that, they're planning these, I call it the coal base extravaganza. A coal base is a giant area by a coal mine where they're going to build coal-fired power plants that will basically, at the mouth of the mine, transfer it out so you don't have to worry about moving it. But they're also going to build coal to liquids, coal to chemicals. There's one of our Choke Point China stories went to the Ningdong coal base. Read it. Huge numbers, lots of employment. It's seen as a savior for poorer parts of northern China. But to make this work, you need water. And according to our calculations, we went to the Chinese energy and water experts. We pulled numbers together like a Reese's peanut butter cup, put them together, and we calculated that 20% of China's water is used by coal. How does coal use water?
Well, when you're cooling the towers.
When you're cooling the towers, even though China has ultra supercritical coal-fired power plants and more they're using air cooling, so that's good. They're 40% more efficient than most of the coal-fired power plants in North Carolina, probably.
Then you gotta clean it.
And you gotta clean it. You have to clean the coal. How else? Are you? She's still. I'm sorry. How else?
Processing.
So you didn't wake up this morning pondering the life cycle of coal, did you? It's okay. But you need to. You need water in the mining process. You also need water to calm down the coal ash, right? And you need water to run the NOx and the SO2 emission control equipment. And so this is our rough estimate. And when we went back, and we've been giving lots of talks in China on this number, and some of my Chinese friends said, no, that it's too high. It can't be 20%. And so I've asked the Chinese energy researchers, well, how much is it? And they said, well, maybe we need to look into that. And we estimate that when you look at how coal is going to expand, that this number could go up to 28%. But China needs water for other things as well. Let's take a little sidestep here. Water for dams, right? Dams. Today they have 150 gigawatts of their power from dams. They want it up to 400. There's been a bit of a more informal moratorium on dams due to protests back in 2005 to stop dam building. But in the 12th five-year plan, in part so they could attain their CO2 emission reduction goals, they said they're planning now 60 large and medium-sized dams. But the challenge is, this is my favorite picture. It's a few years old, but this is a picture of existing planned and under construction dams in China. It's like China's got chicken pox in the southwest, right? A lot of dams. Challenge has been, though, and this is one of our other choke point stories, is that past 2.5 years, China's had 5 major droughts in the south. Some of these big dams in southern China, their water levels have gone so low that they're about 50% lower than they should be. But don't worry. I know you're worried about this, aren't you? Because now in China, every dam that you build, you put a coal-fired power plant next to it. Because once you build this dam and you have this giant transmission line, the west-east pipeline, you've got to keep that power flowing. So a new trend that we discovered is that coal use is actually going up in southern China, the same place that's supposed to be the hydroelectric power revolution. So, bit of a challenge. It's hard to get that coal there, and when they use local coal, high SO2, a lot of arsenic. So my environmental health people here take heed. But don't forget that the United States, we also have a lot of problems with our dams, right? We had our dam revolution a long time ago. That came out so wrong. We had a dam revolution. Lake Mead, Hoover Dam, that area has had a 13-year drought. I can evoke Las Vegas once more. Did you know that Las Vegas, 40% of their power comes from the hydropower from here? Like 29 million people in that region of the country depend on Lake Mead's water. And you can see the bathtub ring. This is from a little over a year ago. This, climate change, heavy usage, and Las Vegas is now, they're building they need to construct a third pipeline because their other water pipelines are way up here. So they've got a big infrastructure investment. So, and also just again, not to keep always looking at China, the United States, I need to get a new map, but 2011, Texas, Oklahoma, severe drought. Again, this was last summer, and Texas was almost to the point where they were possibly going to have to turn off some of their coal-fired power plants. 2007, there was also a big drought down in Georgia, this region of the country. I think North Carolina as well. And I think Duke Energy was at the point that there's like 23 nuclear power and coal-fired power plants that almost had to be shut down. So just keep in mind that this is a universal challenge that, we use water cooling, mainly in the East Coast here. And in some parts of the United States, 75% of the water is needed to be available for cooling coal or nuclear power plants. And so, we're heavily dependent on, this water energy nexus impacts us too. But let's go back to China. We've got a couple seats up here. Please sit down. It's really comfortable. They rock, and you can spin if you're bored. All right. Electrical energy production in China. Okay, pie charts. I'm so sorry, but it's an important pie chart. Remember I told you about China's green revolution? Investing like crazy in renewable power and also nuclear power. They're going to have like 50 nuclear power plants in the next, in 10 years. But look how tiny of a slice it is, right? This major investment, 2010, coal, still 70% of their electricity. And they're going to double their coal use. And again, these are Chinese numbers, not my own made-up ones. And this wedge here of non-coal for 2020, it's 80% of what we consume in this country right now. Okay, get your brain around the scale. This is huge. China's the biggest energy consumer in the world. Or they're on their way to be, depending. Not by per capita. And so what we see here is that coal is king. And the king is very, very thirsty. And the Chinese, being what they are, is that we're going to move the, remember, South-North Water Transfer Project. We're going to move the water north to get it there. Another plan is possibly to build nuclear power plants here that will desalinate water and pump it to Inner Mongolia, where there's lots of coal. And if that works, we will continue the journey all the way to Xinjiang. Because again, the coal in Xinjiang is very clean, but they can't mine it very well because there's not much there. So water serves coal in China. But again, some of you already observed that this is very energy-intensive way of getting at coal. But the coal is there, and there are concerns about energy security. But let's take a moment to ponder some of the other water consumers in China. Agriculture today uses about 64% of China's water, and most likely, 62%. And in 2020, it's likely to go down to 54%. Hope that's the goal, partially because of increases in efficiency, but most likely because it's just going to disappear. Remember, I'm going to try to make a really fancy graphic someday. This is my low-tech version. But remember, I told you about this is where all the coal is, right? All these coal bases going in. But this is where ag is, and this agriculture here, they have to pump 40% of their water is groundwater pumping, which uses energy, right? Water energy nexus goes both directions. But so a lot of the farms are just kind of dying there. But don't worry. You're the worry word up here. Just don't worry. Because when we were reporting and we gave our talks, our Choke Point China talks at the Ministry of Water Resources, they said, "Me wenti, not a problem." Because we're going to move. So this is China. They're going to move their grain belt. I love this country, right? So we're going to expand. Massive amounts of investment are going into Heilongjiang, Inner Mongolia, Jilin, to expand irrigation and agriculture. Again, very technical, we will invest in technically our way out of this problem. What do you think? Does that seem like a good solution? There are grasslands up there. And so we just, our first Choke Point China Part 2 report, first one came out last week, an overview, and we'll have a deeper story into Heilongjiang. The challenge is that even though it's northeast and not as dry as the northwest, it's still a relatively fragile ecosystem. And all over China, you also have big cities growing. China is going to urbanize another 350 million people over the next 10 years. Cities use cement, steel, water, right? Cities themselves are just, energy, the water G confrontation, the water G needs in cities are huge in China and growing. So what's China going to do? Well, import more. You mentioned agriculture earlier, because that's bringing in water, but also coal imports are increasing. Australia, and do we have any Australians in the audience? Any Australians in the audience? No? Australians are very happy to sell their coal to China. This is not a pyramid from Las Vegas. This is actually a pyramid of coal from Newcastle. All the coal from Newcastle, right? All the coal from Newcastle is going to China. But see, Circle Blue went to Australia, and they looked at how is this export of coal impacting water and food in Australia. Well, this coal that they're still mining like crazy now to supply for export is also in one of Australia's grain belts. It's very rich agricultural land. And okay, ponder this. Same question for the United States. When the energy sector and agriculture come in competition, who wins?
Energy.
Energy wins. There's stories, go to Choke Point, US, you'll see plenty of examples in California of how agriculture loses when the oil and gas sector moves in. So, importing more coal. Also, Wyoming and Montana. They're very excited about China's coal import needs. And they're already, we've doubled our coal exports to China in the last year. But, a little bit of a conflict. Oregon and Washington State, the environment, are you from out that way?
Yeah, from Washington.
You kind of look like you watch. Shaggy granola like there and all your, yeah, that's good. So, sorry. So what can you tell me about,
I don't know a lot about it, but I know that there's a lot of protests around a new shipping center or something for coal.
Yeah, I was out giving a talk at University of Washington, and I got to meet Dennis Hayes. Dennis Hayes? The guy who started Earth Day, big environmentalist. And I got to meet him, nice guy at breakfast, and I brought this up. I said, yeah, so what about these deep water ports that are being proposed for Washington? And he said, they're not getting back up fast to us. And he said it away, I was actually scared. But you know who's going to win? Canada. What? The Canadians. British Columbia is like, bring it on here. So there are these coal trains going from the western United States up to Canada. They're shipping it out there. The Canadians also, as a little side note, because I like making fun of I've got a Canadian institute at the Wilson Center. We do meetings together. I had a Canadian Alberta government official next to me. We were talking about the Keystone Pipeline, and I loved it. Finally, I got someone to say this on a webcast. He said, well, you know, if the American environmentalists are so against us shipping our oil here, that's okay. We're building pipelines to the coast and selling it to the Chinese. We're like, cool. Those Canadians. So, but again, but why is China, China's energy needs are huge, but what a big constraint on them, if you haven't picked it up already in my talk, is the water issue. So, importing more. But it's not that's not the only solution. I don't want to describe improperly what's going on in China. China is starting to awaken to the choke points with the water energy confrontation. This is the world's largest coal to liquids plant. It's in Ordos, Inner Mongolia. It was completed in 2008. And the central government had a plan to build like 23 of these. Why do they want coal to liquids? No, well, coal to liquids.
They don't have enough oil.
Oil. They don't have enough oil. Because their oil, and that's another thing too. Remember what happens in China? China's decisions on energy impact the world. Their oil imports are increasing rapidly. And they don't want, they're realizing this is the potential, having a dependence on the Middle East and other countries for oil makes them uncomfortable. We've got coal. We can turn it in to gas. But this is an incredibly water-intensive process and energy-intensive. And if you walk out here with one thing today, you're going to realize energy uses water. I mean, all energy uses water. The choices you make are important on this. And so after this was built, with assistance from, just so you know, the U.S. Department of Energy and Peabody and all those good guys, we were involved in this as well, they realized, wait a minute, maybe this isn't sustainable. So there's temporarily a moratorium on the construction of them, but I think they're already kind of deciding they want to build these big coal bases, and the provinces who they want their own economic development, they're going to build these things eventually because the need for oil is so great. Beijing, next year, they're in all of the water in the inner city, they're going to be recycling it and reusing for flushing toilets and landscaping. And I was super excited at this, right? This is great. And then we went to Shanghai, and we talked to Shanghai officials and said, hey, you guys hear Beijing is doing this big, ambitious recycling program for the city? And they said, we don't have a problem with it here. Shanghai's got plenty of water. Really? Okay. So far this experiment is relatively new. But the 12th five-year plan, I'm very excited. I get excited about weird things. But the 12th five-year plan is requiring that industries must become 30% more water efficient. It's the first time there's been like a big national goal. So they'll be setting targets for different industries to be more efficient. But the difference is, though, like remember I started this off about the Green Revolution? The details of how that has worked. China had targets in their plan. They made new energy laws, renewable energy laws. Energy conservation law was made stricter, that government, provincial officials would lose their job if they didn't reach the goal. And there were huge campaigns, 1,000 energy-intensive industries. All the CEOs were brought in and screamed at by the premier one time when they weren't reaching their goals. It was this really comprehensive attack on making the country more energy efficient. And for China's water problems, they need a similar attack. It's not just like Beijing says it, but it was really well planned, and and it is exciting to see. So wind and solar, if your production processes are efficient and you don't pollute, these kinds of renewable energies can be very water sipping and water efficient. And this is a steel plant, one of the largest in the world in Gansu province. We got to go hang out there a little bit. They actually recycle 98% of their water. And so a lot of companies, even without the government telling them to, are starting to be more efficient. And then there's shale gas. You guys heard of shale gas? Oh, yeah. So coal is king, dams are queen, and this is the new princeling in China. Very new. They have done 60 exploratory wells, about a dozen or so horizontal fracking. It's regulated by the Ministry of Land and Resources, but the Ministry of Environmental Protection, they can't regulate anything under the ground, right? So that there's no regulatory structure yet to deal with the water needs or the water pollution. If pollution comes above ground, in theory, they would be, the Ministry of Environmental Protection should be able to enforce it. But water pollution problems have been quite great. Oops, wrong. Oh, here we go. This map shows you a map where it's going to be. The shale gas. This is actually a Michigan shale gas well, but it's a pretty one, right? So shale gas, their big shale resources are probably up in Xinjiang, in the Tarn River Basin, and down in Sichuan. And in today, you've learned, from me already, we don't have water up here, right? Here, while it's relatively rich in water resources, they have been going through droughts. But it's the same part of the region where they're building dams like crazy. Cities are growing massively, and they're planning to transfer lots of water out. This is an infrastructure clash, not too unlike the United States. We're doing shale, we're bringing in tar sands oil, we're doing biofuels. These parts are all moving, but there's no one really looking at the bigger picture on what the footprint is on water. And that's a challenge for China. When my folks at Circle Blue, they were in Sichuan, and they were driving along the highway, and there's a sign that said, the shale gas well here, and they pulled off the road. And public road, they were just standing, and they were looking at the picture you saw, the pipe dream picture, that was just the picture of that well. They're not very sexy pictures. This one's a funner picture. They're just standing there, just taking a picture, just kind of looking at it, just saying because they were interviewing business people and officials, and you thought you should just look at the well, right? Well, a few minutes later, about 6 big black vans showed up, and all these Petro-China people in red jumpsuits jumped out and said, "What are you doing here?" And my friend Keith is like, "Hi, we're just looking at your shale gas thing." And then this farmer walks up and starts yelling at the Petro-China people, saying, "Since you put this here, my fish have sores on them and my plants aren't growing." And you can imagine. My guy Keith Schneider, a New York Times journalist, is like, "I can't believe this is happening." He's calm. He's like, click, click, click. And, so it's just like, wow, stories come to you. But see, China, their shale gas reserves, why I had the pipe dream issue, while they are they have as much, if not more, reserves than we do. But whether or not they can access them is a big question. Because in Sichuan province, I don't know how much you guys are familiar, it's very mountainous here. And so it's hard to move the equipment, it's a lot deeper, and there's also naturally occurring, and I hope I say this right because I know there's scientists in the room, hydrogen sulfide. Does that sound right? So hydrogen sulfide is a natural, it occurs naturally in a lot of China's natural gas, which includes shale gas reserves. And in a natural gas well, also out in Sichuan a few years back, that hydrogen sulfide leaked and killed a couple hundred people. And thousands were injured and 60,000 people evacuated from a Chinese village, okay? Villages are big in China. And Chevron was brought in to make sure this doesn't happen again. So international companies, natural gas and oil companies are starting to come in quite big in China. Everyone quite excited about the shale gas revolution. But the pollution potential, if China does not regulate pollution from shale gas development, and they don't have a good record of this in the oil industry in China in general, it can exacerbate what's already a very fragile and vulnerable water system in China. The rivers, there's a great book called Elizabeth Economy wrote a number of years ago that's still worth a read. The river runs black. But they're not just black, they're red, green, and blue. Do we have any blue jeans here in the audience today? Yeah, blue jeans, right. This is from the blue jean capital in Guangdong province, where almost all of the world's blue jeans are made. The main manufacturers where Levi and H&M and Target and all those guys are, those factories themselves are very efficient. The big concern in textiles is from the mom and pop, small, medium enterprises that dye, the dyeing sector. And the river runs denim blue. My Greenpeace guys have been taking these photos. But Greenpeace is working with Natural Resources Defense Council to engage these textile manufacturers to teach them low-cost, no-cost ways of actually, hey, if you recycle these chemicals rather than dumping them. But here's the question. Why do Chinese companies, why do they just dump, why don't they not treat their waste?
It's cheaper to just dump.
It's cheaper. But China they've revised their water pollution control law 3 times. Increased the fines, stricter standards. But water quality, I mean, to its credit, Chinese water quality overall, while the economy has grown 8-fold, has stayed pretty consistently bad. So in some ways they're controlling something, but 35% of the water are the lowest 3 grades. It used to be just 4 and 5, and then they said they added 5+. That tells you a lot. If anyone knows Spinal Tap, this goes to 11. Sorry. I have to do that because it's like, China makes me laugh. I mean, you can tell I love China, right? And there's always funny little anecdotes like this. But what's not funny, though, is that these are qualities, this should not be drunk. It should not be put on your food. And depressingly, particularly for my friends who are going to China soon, we have stories coming out about how industrial water is used to irrigate crops. Are the farmers stupid?
No.
No. You have no choice. It's the only water that there is. And so there's a lot of, your lakes, big eutrophication, toxic algae in the major lakes in China, and a lot of protests over time. That over the environmental protests, I mean, we've done some research on it, that we think there's probably about 5,000 major protests every year around environmental issues, and a lot of them are water. Because the farmers in China, they were the lead of the economic revolution in China, but they've been losing out. And, prices have gotten higher for seeds and all this stuff, but not the prices for the food that they're selling. And but at least if you're producing, if you have a farm, you can grow food for yourself. But you get thousands and thousands of anecdotes around China that farmers will find that the soil and the water are polluted, and then their crops are contaminated. And if it's known that your village's crops are, polluted, you can't sell them. And so you go complain to the local official. Will the local officials respond to your complaints?
No.
Why not?
Because those businesses pay tax to local business, and also there's like a huge issue of corruption in local business, local government.
No.
Yes.
Actually, it's another question. Take a step back. What's the largest polluter of water in China?
Government.
What source?
Power plant. Power plant.
No, it's not. They contribute, but the number one source?
Agriculture.
Agriculture. And it's been a neck-and-neck race between agriculture and municipal waste, and ag just pulled ahead. But for many years, municipal waste was the number one polluter of water in China. But then there's also, there's also power plants and industry also polluting, and it's a very tough situation. There's a documentary that, my bad headline anyway, the Warriors of Qiugang, Qiugang, Warriors of Qiugang. You could probably get it on demand. You should watch that. It's a great documentary about a village in Anhui province where a Chinese NGO helps the village get organized and take their complaint to Beijing and effectively close down a chemical plant that has been making them sick. Have you seen it?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Oh, yeah, here it is. The Warriors of Chogang. And and then the environmental NGO is, I just mentioned that because Chinese, in terms of civil society, and this is my last slide, and then we're going to ask questions. You guys bored? You okay? Hanging in on it? All right, good. We're talking for 45 minutes. In the environmental sphere, in the civil society sphere, the first groups that could register, starting in 1994 when the law was passed, were green groups. Friends of Nature was the first one. And early on, they focused very much on environmental education, animal protection, right, and working with the government. But starting in the late 90s, you started getting a few hard-hitting groups. And the issue is that, there is political space for them to operate, but there's challenges of capacity, and sometimes you can only push so far. But there's a Center for Legal Assistance for Pollution Victims, a Chinese lawyer. He's a guy who's like this big, but he's the lion of China, man. They have a hotline for pollution victims. He has a network of lawyers around the country that take cases to court. I got some lawyers.
I just heard about that guy.
He's a great guy. Again, big stuff in small packages here. And then they also work with American Bar Association, EPA, and Natural Resources Defense Council. They've created China's first public interest law firm. And interesting for our story here today on water energy choke point, Friends of Nature, the very first NGO, with the help of CLAPV and NRDC, has brought a public interest law case against a coal-fired power plant in Yunnan province, which is kind of crazy because it's like they have hints of what, they don't really have public interest law, but there's like hints of it in some of the environmental laws, like the water law. And so what's really exciting about the NGOs, both international and Chinese NGOs, they're pushing the envelope and have been working often in partnership with the Chinese government. The U.S. Energy Foundation has an office in Beijing, and the funds that they've given to Chinese government and international researchers and NGOs, they're the ones who have really helped push the clean energy legislation and regulations that we see in China. And I'm really eager in my network to mobilize them to think about the water piece. Because really the water piece, water is, I think it's China's biggest challenge. And this is Ma Jun. Have you guys ever heard of Ma Jun? Ma Jun, he's my hero. He was actually, he was on my first research exchange where I brought some water experts from U.S. and China together to look at water conflict resolution in both countries. He was a journalist, and I exposed him to U.S. NGOs and the work that U.S. NGOs work on transparency issues, information clearinghouse, but opening up information for the public to act. And so he told me when he first met me that he wasn't an activist, but he is the leading water activist in China and just received the Goldman Prize this year. And he says it's all my fault, and I'm really happy to be blamed for that. That his group, Institute for Public and Environmental Affairs, created China's first online water pollution database. There is data in China. Public data on water pollution by factory. And they put it on a searchable map. Has anyone ever seen this map? Maybe you've heard of it. And so you can click on and find out which suppliers, which companies are polluting. Who are the first big users of his website? Would you guess?
Companies, the government.
Pardon?
The government.
The government applauded it.
Researchers.
International companies. The Levi's, the Targets, the Coca-Colas, the GEs, the Walmarts, right? Because a lot of international companies, and hopefully with more pressure from us consumers, you guys, are starting to say, hey, if China's skies are black and their waters are black, and I'm wearing these jeans, it's okay, we're all wearing these jeans, don't feel guilty about it. Maybe there's something going on, that I'm connected to this pollution somehow. And so these companies came to Ma Jun and said, well, look, no, we've fixed our suppliers here. We've cleaned them up. And Ma Jun got an idea and said, really now? And he started a program called the Green Choice Alliance, where a network of 30 Chinese NGOs working with the business community, that when you come to me as Levi Strauss and you say, look, my suppliers are clean, and I'll say, okay, we have auditors in where your suppliers are, and we're going to go check it out, and local community people have to be there too. He also has been doing, they did a study of the IT industry. This is where you may have heard of him. He went to all the IT companies and asked them to open their books and tell us about your supply chain. Which company refused, you guys? Apple. Now, see, Apple shouldn't mess with Ma Chun because he's a former journalist, man. He tells a story where in the middle of the night he's rowing across a lake in the dock to go take samples outside one of the plants that Apple is not, because Apple won't even reveal where their plants were for the longest time. And and so finally, after a couple of years of pressure, it wasn't just him alone, but Apple now has they've opened their books. And Apple's starting to work on addressing their pollution problems, which makes me happy because I'm a Mac user. How many of you have Apple stuff? Raise your hand. Right? So yeah, so we too can demand this of our Apple. So I'm going to stop here right now. I could tell you more about the U.S., but I'd like to open up some questions. Yes?
I was actually at the Wilson Institute a while ago, and I listened
Wilson
to
Institute or Wilson Center?
Wilson Center.
Okay,
and
I'm not in Princeton.
there was talk about the development of tort laws and a lot of law cases that people are trying to get together in China now. Do you know where that development has been, and how exactly did civilian lawsuits get into litigation? And because I know there's a couple of NGOs that do go around providing legal assistance and trying to help people get together, but I just don't know much about the judicial system and how that works.
Well, I mean, what's interesting, I mean, that to keep in mind, again, not to overplay the role of NGOs, but the Chinese government itself, being aware of the environmental problems, in the judicial sphere, legal sphere, they've been really open to CLAPFI, the Center for Legal Assistance for Pollution Victims, and EPA and American Bar Association have been doing trainings of judges and lawyers, and even at the party school, not the party school, you guys. The Central Party School, because of Natural Resource Defense Council, has created a curriculum for environmental education. So party leaders are learning about environment, and so it's you have to keep in mind when Deng Xiaoping opened up China back in 1980, they didn't have lawyers. Right? With some people, indeed, that always gets a laugh in DC. It's a DC joke. China needs lawyers, like Mars needs moms. China needs lawyers. So, there's through these networks, building the capacity and understanding. Some law schools in China have some of their law clinics focused specifically on pollution victims. Also, labor issues too, some of them. But I mean, is this kind of get...
I guess what I mean is, with unrestricted power of eminent domain and stuff like that, how exactly do you have a basis for a claim in a legal lawsuit if you don't technically have...
Standing?
Yeah. I don't quite understand how...
But in the base environmental law, see, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm going to do my best because you seem like you got some law background here, right?
No, not really. I just read
But there's a lawyer guy in the back, so I have to be careful. Two of them, right? China's main environmental law, like their NEPA, says if you are a pollution victim, you have a right to sue. And the water law and other environmental pollution laws have clauses that will say you have a right to sue. And the most recent water law, I don't know the exact wording, kind of says public interests lawsuits. I don't quite my lawyer kids, I'm going to have a meeting. Actually, I'm going to have a meeting on the coal plant public interest case soon, and it will be webcast. So you can you can even email in questions. We'll pretend we're like a radio show. There's a lot of moving parts, but there's also China's created some environmental law courts. They're specifically meant to take on cases that maybe go beyond the county, kind of basin-wide type cases. And it's really interesting to me that there's a lot of, both from the government side and the outside, NGOs trying to really push for this kind of reform. So does that kind of answer your question? I mean, there's a lot going on, but if you really want the answers, again, my mafia is rich and big, and if you're writing papers on this stuff and you do some work, I'll connect you to folks. You have a question?
I was wondering about you didn't talk a whole lot about climate predictions of water supply change, but a lot of that's the southern water supply, from my understanding, comes off the glaciers and snowpack in the Himalayan and Tibetan Plateau. And I mean, those, regardless of climate change, are reducing in size, but quite significantly. So, I mean, can you you have any more information on that aspect of the water supply, and in particular with relation to the south-north transfer, since the Yangtze is fed by those, and then second, like, how is the Chinese government taking into account the sort of climate change modeling with expectation to this water transfer?
Yeah, sorry, I cover a lot of ground, but yeah, no, it's true that, I mean, when I mentioned the droughts, I should have inserted in there, because of climate change, the glaciers are melting. But it's a double impact. It's both the glaciers are melting and water consumption is growing, and China wastes a lot of water. Their industries are very wasteful. Their agriculture, incredibly wasteful. Water is priced too low. It's an open access resource. This is like it's a perfect storm of bad stuff around water. So you can see why I do water, right? Because there's so much progress that could be made. But the Chinese government, the central officials, they buy into the climate change thing. When our Congress was not doing its stuff, about, when we finally was, killed the whole idea of an energy and climate bill, the Chinese central government state council issued a white paper on climate. It has set targets, and you can argue that, well, they're targets based on GDP growth, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, in China, a number of years ago, if you said climate change, they'll say, yeah, I just kind of, like no one knew what the hell you're talking about, but people know, and your barometer is you talk to the taxi drivers. Taxi drivers in China, used to be when I go to China, I'd say, the sky's so polluted. I said, no, there's fog. And I'd have arguments about fog, pollution with my taxi driver. And now I get in the taxi and they're waxing poetic about low carbon cities. And they're like, and also saying, and they will say, it is incredibly polluted. And I'm angry. Also because I have to have a natural gas car that fills up the trunk and I can't fit bags in it, and the skies are still bad, right? So the taxi driver barometer. So even the taxi drivers know that. And climate change, the NGO sphere. There is a climate action network now in China. Greenpeace has been working on this issue, and there's a growing awareness. But for a lot of the Chinese NGOs, they went to Copenhagen and stuff. So there's this awareness. But in China, it's very much, my NGO friends and researchers say, it's more important to focus on what the local impacts of stuff. The pollution issue, because again, you saw they are choking on the pollution. Climate change is like the whipped cream, right? It's good. We'll deal with that too. The co-benefit's great, but what's really driving it in China is that the air is polluted and the coal is difficult to get at. So becoming more efficient. The China. Again, I hope you don't misunderstand me when I make all my jokes about them just building stuff to solve problems. They are very pragmatic, and but sometimes it's a question of them getting enough information. And my hope. We've started Choke Point China Part 2, and I'm putting together a group of U.S.-China water and energy experts. Maybe I need to get a U.S. shale person. And to go to China and have meetings and start creating a kind of roadmap document, my first step, with Chinese experts on what should China do on the water energy confrontation. Because I want to make this water energy stuff is not just me just doing, I'm doing some multimedia reports and I'm done. This is going to be, hopefully, my work for the next few years. We're going to India next month, Choke Point, India, to look at the water energy confrontation. And Choke Point, Middle East, I'm working with I'm basically on the Choke Point manager at the Wilson Center now. So, because I really feel like this water energy thing is important, but a way to kind of highlight it is working with this journalist NGO and the Wilson Center network. Some other questions. I went totally out there, but propaganda moment, had to take it.
Also, if the Marine Lab has a question.
Marine Lab, do you have a question? Sorry.
Yeah, when I was listening to the story of the dams, and I'm not sure what the consequences of the other energy development would be, but there must be huge resettlement implications with this. And has your group looked at sort of the predicted resettlement that would be associated with this development?
Well, the big one was, of course, the Three Gorges Dam, and that's done. They've been moved. We had to move some more because there were landslides associated with the dam. And the Chinese government, we got to move another 2 million. Done. I just love. They got ahead of the ball on that one. They immediately said, "Mistake, we're moving them. They're gone." It is more difficult to move them, and there's because of how badly the resettlement went with the Three Gorges Dam. Really. And there's still conflict and violence around it. You resettle farmers into cities. what can he do? He has no land or job training. You sent some of their kids to the East Coast so they can make money and send it home. But it's for the greater good. But we're not in Mao's era anymore, where people voluntarily went out and built the dams by themselves with hand and moved away. But some of the dams, some of them are in much more remote regions, and they're like in the New Jiang, the New River, which is the Salween. The numbers of people are not that great because they're very narrow, steep gorges, but they are all ethnic minorities too, which is that was the initial conflict back in 2005, that there was a national NGO and green journalist kind of movement shining a light on the New Jiang Dam planning. But so for some of the dams, even I'm talking 60, it's not at the same scale as the Three Gorges. But again, local governments are extremely powerful in China. I mean, that's the other little factoid to walk out of here. The Deng Xiaoping decentralized power back in the early 80s. Local governments have incredible amounts of power. And yes, they've been writing a lot more, environmental laws and regulations to try to, in some ways, almost create kind of a federal checks and balances with local governments. But that said, local governments, they will move the people. And protests will be suppressed. But yeah, it's a big challenge. A guy at Cornell wrote a great book called China's Water Warriors that talks about these protests. And again, I say small. Okay, so it's like 60, 70,000 people. But in China, that's small. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Another one. Okay, you could.
Can you give us a sense on your dams map? How many are really large dams?
You mean the ones that are the upcoming ones? I'd have to get back to you on the exact list. We have a list. I have a list back at the Wilson Center. I mean, it's large and medium dams. I mean, I can't. I don't have that list in the back pocket. Actually, the International Rivers folks, if you go on their website, and if you need a list, I could get it for you. Yeah.
No, it's like here in the States, there's a lot of dams, but some of them are really small.
No, but these are the 60 that are in the 12th five-year plan for renewable energy. The 60 planned dams are large and medium. These are huge dams. And some of them are meant to, about a dozen of them, 20 of them are meant to save the Three Gorges Dam. Three Gorges Dam is getting silted up. So they need to start damming further up. They should have just had the small one first. But no, they're big. But I can get you a list. And also China, they're investing, did you guys hear that the Burmese people rejected Chinese investment in a dam there? But what's crazy about the plan in that? Because we have a research brief coming out on that shortly too. That like 90% of the energy would have gone to China. But what's even weirder is that maybe it wouldn't have gone to China because I found out that the developers in Yunnan province would have then sold that energy to other parts of Southeast Asia. And which is like, wait a minute, don't we need energy in China? But the Asian Development Bank and others have invested in improving roads and electrical grids in the Mekong River Basin. So it kind of makes, so the Chinese are investing in dams, not just to supply themselves, but really to supply the grid in Southeast Asia. So yeah, but Chinese, they're big dam builders around the world. Africa, the Sudan. Okay.
So I have two questions, but one, a comment on the resettlement as well. I was actually working with some Three Gorges migrants who were resettled, and one of the big things that I saw was that culture was something that was incredibly impacted, and that's something that is often discounted. But you had people moving from Sichuan province where they speak Sichuanhua, and then they were moving.
Which no one else can understand.
No one else can understand at all, and then you have them moving to Guangdong where they're speaking Cantonese. So they were having a lot of issues working with the local government. They couldn't get things fixed. People thought they were yelling at each other because both are sort of hostile sounding languages. So it was just another one of these things that's a consideration when you're thinking about resettlement in China, because it's not a homogeneous population at all. But as for questions, one was about legislation and law again, so going back to that. So what sorts of holes are sort of missing right now from environmental legislation? So like in the US, for example, with the Clean Water Act, we don't have non-point sources being regulated, and we don't have the shale companies releasing their proprietary chemical information, things like that. What's going on in China that's really missing And then you mentioned that ag is currently 64% of Chinese water use, but it's going to be dropping in the future. With demographic changes like an increasing population and a higher middle class that's going to be consuming more meats and consuming more stuff in general, how is that? Are they just going to be land grabbing? And what are they
Southeast Asia better watch out, man. I mean, Laos already. I mean, the Kuwaitis and Saudis and the Koreans are already taking land leasing land like crazy in Southeast Asia. Chinese, there's one of those issues that I'm trying to raise the awareness, getting people in my network who work in Southeast Asia pay attention to. In the ag investments overseas, what's interesting is actually by the provincial. It's like provincial ag extension offices. So it's not like centrally government led. And whether or not, are these guys going to pay attention to environmental, and it's also the host countries themselves that, foreigners come in and invest in land and, they don't care. It's money and the Chinese have a lot of money. So there'll be, China, most likely their investments in agricultural land overseas will increase. I mean, it's growing in Africa. That's not always necessarily sending back to China, though. A lot of that's just producing there. But agricultural imports will increase. I mean, it's inevitable. I mean, they don't have enough water to supply their own, with the urbanization, the ag development, the energy development. Unless something drastic is done, they just don't have the water. And again, my whole Las Vegas thing here, right? The pun is there'll be a ripple effect throughout the world as China needs water. And in terms of legislation, there's lots of gas. I mean, there is no shale gas legislation. Non-point sources are also not well regulated. Ergo, we have lakes that are green with toxic algae. It's a tough nut for them. But they have a lot of really good laws. If they would enforce what's on the books, you could see a lot of improvement. So that the real gap is more in local enforcement, which is why the creation of these environmental courts and in actually enforcing the law. But it is tough. But it's also an issue too that they're enforcing laws better on the East Coast now, right? People are richer, right? The East Coast of China, the cities. People are educated, the middle class, right? Think of your little bell curve, right? The people are saying okay, I have enough money, I don't want my children choking on polluted air. So dirty industries are moving out west. Inner Mongolia. So the pulp and paper mills, you're not having those outside Shanghai as much anymore. They're moving west. But that's moving it to more ecologically fragile regions of China. At the same time that you're building dams, you're doing that, so Western China is really, and particularly I think Southwest China, Sichuan, that's the hot spot for where there's, and it's also, of course, where the pandas are. Most biodiversity. Actually, yeah, got to mention pandas, dams, and Mao at least one time in any talk on China. So, check. Yes.
You mentioned the Chinese presence in places like Sudan. How do you think that will affect broader international relations as people start to get more interested in the potential resource exports from places like Africa and Sudan and the ongoing conflicts that are in those regions?
Well, I mean, I think in the Olympics, that's when we started really seeing this, remember the campaign for the Genocide Olympics, right? About how, because of the dam building and the oil in the Sudan, fueling the war. It's like, China had the backs of the government. This was, seen as a bad thing. And actually, in my network, I mean, what's amazing, just let's talk about the foundation world, USAID, big donors around the world. The whole China's ecological footprint, that's the new topic. And it's been like lemmings, right? Watching all of the bingos, the big international NGOs, everyone's going over that area, which is okay. But I mean, that's what, I live in the nonprofit world too. You go where the money is. But I was actually doing meetings on it. I call them my complex connection series, where looking at, it's too easy to say bad Chinese government extracting resources when in fact there's a lot of international involvement in this as well, and not just the poor regulation of the host countries. Timber, I had this Ph.D. student say, I invite Ph.D. students to come and talk sometimes, so you guys go doing smart projects, you can come up. He was looking at deforestation in Laos, and he said it was very complex. It wasn't just that Mr. Chinese guy coming in and cutting the trees, it was actually the Japanese and the Aikido guys. They were cutting the trees and shipping them to China to be made in all the nice little products in our Walmarts and IKEA stores. So it was and we're consuming it, right? So the connections are complex. The timber stuff is getting interesting though, because there is the timber extraction side, because there's more push, for the certification issue, and But yeah, that is the big topic now around China, and I think it's easy to demonize. But there are also some interesting examples that even PetroChina has said no in case, I think it was in Uganda, where the Ugandan government wanted them to say, yeah, here. Oh, it's a nature reserve, we don't care. Go. And they said no. Friends of the Earth has done, if you go online, Friends of the Earth has got a really interesting series of reports on both good and bad cases of Chinese investment. They did some cool things, I think it was down in Peru too, where they said, no, we're not, the Peruvian government, they were, come here. They're like, no, we're not going to do this. This is a place where there's what do they call them, the non-contacted peoples, right? It's like, and so there, and a lot of, and some Chinese companies, some Chinese oil companies are actually reaching out to like World Resources Institute, International Rivers, to talk to them about, well, we want to be a big player in the world, and maybe it's not in our best interest to make bad news stories, right? And so it's very interesting, and even China Exim Bank, which is putting more money into Chinese companies than the World Bank does around the world. They're concerned about maybe starting to trying to figure out environmental principles, but at the same time, again, China's complex and big and a lot of players. China Development Bank has been told, get the money out. And so China Development Bank, it's like Santa Claus, man, throwing money out there. And Erica Downs at Brookings, she's got a really interesting report on the China Development Bank, looking at that trend. It's very complex, and a lot of this comes down to the financing. And then you got weird stories like two Chinese guys. Can you imagine you're sitting down one day and say, hey Frank, I hear that, or Wang, I hear that down in DRC in Africa that they've got a lot of copper smelting. Let's buy us a smelter and go there. And you have these crazy, like mom and pop copper smelters going to DRC and just like, just like really weird, private, but at a massive scale. And Chinese bringing in all their miners, right? Chinese companies, it's the weirdest thing. Exporting miners, so, we don't need the Africans, we have the Chinese miners. So so again, these are people in my network, and I could direct you to stories. So I'm just kind of just giving you a sense. Did I come anywhere close to maybe answering the question?
Yeah.
Okay. In the back of the room, yes, sir.
Yeah. Do you think there will be widespread desalination? Which kind, and if so, do you think there's a role for nuclear?
Oh, I've answered that question. Desal. China, when we did our choke report, did you guys hear the question out in wherever you are again? Whether or not China's going desal. I didn't know if they could hear it from back. China's definitely going big into desalinization. This summer, my Circle of Blue friends, they went to Qingdao. You know the beer? Qingdao beer? Just checking. Qingdao, coastal city, prides itself on being clean and green. They're one of the low-carbon cities in China. They are building 10 desalinization plants. And some of that being used for nuclear power, all along the coastline. They're going desal. Beijing, what's funny, northern China, right, the South North Water Transfer Project was supposed to help save them in terms of water. Well, it ends up, the water, remember my water pollution story? What do you think the quality of water is at the mouth of the Yangtze River? Yeesh. They've had to build 400 wastewater treatment plants along the Eastern Canal, so that now they're passing that cost along to the cities in the north. And so this water from the south north is actually really expensive. And crazily enough, it's like Beijing has decided they're going desal. And we said this like a year and a half ago, and I was like, you're crazy. And then the news story came out. I'm like, yep, they're going desalinization because they need water. So the cities are thirsty, the energy sector is thirsty. It's like, but desalinization, very energy intensive. But again, then they say, well, if we use nuclear to power it, but that's...
Which kind? Desalination.
Which kind?
Yeah.
I can connect you to the MIT person who can tell you. Basically all kinds, but some of my friends have said one thing that's good, my MIT buddy said, if the Chinese decide desalinization will save us, that they may work to develop technologies that make it more energy efficient. Maybe CCS will be better. CCS uses a lot of energy too. That's another. So maybe if any country is going to bring desalinization to scale efficiently, maybe it could be China. But if they're supplying desalinization with coal, that loop is going again. Yes.
I just have a question. You talked a lot about mining and water pollution and air pollution. I just want to ask what kind of health risks are associated with that, and how is China dealing with those?
Of the mining pollution and
and especially if you're talking about building stuff in other countries. So is China being involved in any kind of health-related schemes to protect the health of people, say in Africa, where they're building mines and dams?
I would say not in their overseas stuff, and I mean mining itself. I mean, you guys know that in terms of just even the safety of the mining, they've got the largest number of 7,000 people die each year in mines at least. The health problems are particularly around, like also the huge coal ash. I mean, it's not just a pile; it's like several counties worth. Greenpeace did a fabulous study on the true cost of coal. They have a number of them. And they had a big one on coal ash, which actually led Premier Wen Jiabao to invite Greenpeace in because he was not aware of this. And the Ministry of Environmental Protection is supposed to look into this issue. And I was just talking to you, Erica, last night that maybe we're going to have legislation because no one does coal ash well, right? Does anyone take care of coal ash well? No one does. So China has no model. But no, that it's a huge issue. I mean, China. 750,000 people die early each year from air pollution issues. That's maybe an old number. I don't know. It's a lot of asthma problems. I mean, the Ministry of Health was silent forever on pollution health stuff until about 2005, 2006, and they randomly issue numbers sometimes, and I don't know where they get the data, but they're saying they come out and say how cancer rates are increasing due to air and water pollution by 20% from 5 years ago. I don't know where they're getting these numbers, but it's significant for China watchers to say, they're at least issuing numbers. But there is a group, there's the SSRC, Social Science Research Council, a woman named Jennifer Holdaway. I can hook you up with her. She has it's the Environmental Health Web, I think it's called. So she's bringing together environmental health researchers in China. Health Effects Institute up in Boston has also been working. The US EPA did a big energy option health benefit study in Shanghai and then Beijing, and have a national one. So on the research side, there's a lot of this going on. I think that, it's... And the number, Shanghai changed their whole 10th five-year plan once they saw the data. Like, you will kill less of your people. Okay, good. Yes, sir. And then I'll get you guys. You're just persistent.
I know, the local governments and the provinces, they all want to take on these big development projects.
Which development ones do you mean?
Like energy development and things like that. But how do they balance it out between all these problems that the developments are making?
Well, actually, no. I'd have to contradict you there. Local governments are involved. Shale gas in China. Local governments will be investing in that. Local governments run the mines. And that's been a problem. So when they try to close the small mines, they get opened back up a week later. Local governments are very, very involved. Maybe not the big, offshore oil and stuff like that, but no, even wind farms. We have a proliferation of wind farms in China because there are subsidies, and every province is saying, all right, shift your widget factory to wind farms. Okay. So they switched it because there are subsidies, encouragements, and then you have them garbage wind power because it's not connected to anything. So is that... So
I was talking about more about foreign investments.
Foreign investments.
And then when they pour into individual provinces, I know some of them they fight for these big development projects. But at the same time there's a backlash of harmful effects. So how do they decide in choosing whether they want this project?
You mean whether the local government decides?
Or I guess more of the province government?
Well, it kind of depends on the scale. If a project of any sort, even a company, is of a certain scale, it may have to get national approval. But there are examples where protests like chemical plants. If we can broaden the question, that investment into chemical plants, that communities are starting to protest because there's a law, an environmental impact assessment law. That there's another kind of answer to your question, but that there's supposed to be public hearings for major development projects. And a lot of local governments, they kind of wiggle around that. Like they'll go do a survey on the other side of town. That's my favorite one. Guangdong, I know, Guangdong and Hong Kong built this massive road together. And in Hong Kong, oh my God, Hong Kong, like a really extensive survey, and it was all online and all stuff. And in Guangdong, they seriously asked the people on the other side of town, about 2,000 people, and that was their EIA hearing. Is that, I'm giving you anecdotes, but it really depends on the specific case. Okay. But yeah. Some other questions? Okay, you finally. Jeez.
My question was actually leading up to like the building of the Three Gorges Dam. I mean, the government, it was a vision developed by Mao. It was championed by Deng Xiaoping. The first premier that worked on it was also a Russian trained engineer or something. Mm-hmm. And it just seemed like it had so much momentum because the political clout behind it was, it pushed it as a symbol of national progress and national development. And then after they built the dam in the grand opening ceremony, no members from the CCP Politburo was there. It just looked like they were distancing themselves from it because they were expecting backlash. And ever since all of the science that's come out with the seismic activity and the landslides and all of the mess that's been the Three Gorges Dam, the scientific community has been a lot more vocal about how they're handling hydroelectricity.
And that's what it kind of goes to your question, like this in Sichuan, the scientific community. A lot of them and the provincial government are adamantly against the South North Water Transfer Project because they're saying, there are people that are, they may not couch it in terms of the water energy confrontation, but they're seeing that Sichuan, a biodiverse, water relatively fluid area, is coming under stress. And that the dams, and particularly after the big earthquake in 2008, which people are saying, maybe all these dams we're putting in, whether or not we know how big they are, could be an impact. And then you add on top of that the potential of re-injection of shale gas fluids in a earthquake-prone area. Yeah, but your question is like,
what kind of policy changes have we seen? What kind of changes in developmental models? Or I know they're switching to smaller scale, like just series of dams. They're looking more into doing series to like break them up, I guess.
I think the thing is that the idea of doing cascade dams is simple. I'm a little cynical on this one, saying that then it kind of flies a little bit under the radar because it's not as big, but the ecological and social impacts could be just as bad as opposed to a big one. It's the dam issue. It's something we have to watch because again, there had been a shift, kind of an anti-dam even among the government. Because the Three Gorges Dam, it wasn't as smooth sailing as I don't think you meant to imply that, because there was a lot of protests even beforehand, and even the National People's Congress, which has never ever it's their Congress, right? Has never before it was like 1990, they had never voted no on anything, and like 700 of them said no to the Three Gorges Dam. You're like, oh my God, the rubber stamp has changed. We're kind of confused here. It's hard to say because now, again, the pressures for energy are so great, but then like the environmental activists are saying like my friend Ma Chun is like, okay, we know we need hydropower, but do you have to dam every single gorge? But it's a little bit of the local center relations because a lot of dams, particularly the smaller ones, total local government, big windfalls, and they don't care who they move. So I would say that. I think we're in for a gold rush of dam building because it's in the 12th five-year plan, renewable energy plan now, 60 medium and small dams. But my fear is that they're going to build these things and there's no water. Bit of a problem. But of course, someone has lined their pockets. Some other questions?
I have to ask about relations with Central Asia.
Okay.
And just wondering how the resource wealth in Central Asia has affected China's energy security, given that there's a lot of hoo-ha in the mid-1990s about the Chinese oil companies going into Central Asia. and developing the resources in Kazakhstan and pipelines going to China. What has been the impact of that, and how has that shaped Chinese, energy security relations with its neighbors?
I'm not
water relations.
Well, I'm not as fluent as I want to be on this because there aren't as many people looking at it. But one thing, there's a couple of things I can say is that one thing that was amazing with Deng Xiaoping. Okay, there's a lot of problems with the guy, but he was real smart in that he normalized the borders and relations, and which enabled this kind of investment. And I know that there are a lot of concerns about the pipelines and a lot of the Central Asian countries being worried that the Chinese want our water. Or they're going to pollute our water, and that's it's almost the pollution angle is getting quite bigger. But you ask a question that as I'm doing more of my Chinese footprint overseas, but it's a hard question because there aren't as many people. Do you know a lot of people? I'm always looking for people who I don't trip across them as easily as I do people that work on like the Russia, like there's the Russia-China stuff and the Southeast Asia-China relations and China-Africa. But the Central Asian stuff, I don't know. There is, that the Chinese are, I actually have a guy at University of Chicago, Northwestern University film guy is going to come and screen a film he's just done on Chinese investment in copper and gold mining in Afghanistan. Which is, I'll let you know. Maybe we can have him come down to Duke and screen it. Because it's, I mean, in some ways that I think we could go to any country in the world. My problem is I'm just one person. But you're right, though. But thank you. But that kind of question gets me like. See, now I'm going to have to go home and start emailing people. I like that. Just in the back.
I've got some questions. Sorry, I'm a little bit late, so I might have missed something you have talked about before that. Sorry. The first question is that as far as I know, that as Yangtze River has pollution issues, and the government actually has been working on it for dozens of years, but it does not work that well. Have you taken some of the into as to what the losses and inefficiencies in addressing this problem? And the second question is that it's just that because Chinese and the United States have very different cultures. I mean, they have different social institutions and social cultures and rules, and what you are addressing here is the laws and NGOs which work in the United States but might not work that well in China. Have you figured out any localized driving force in China that is different from the United States but might be helpful to help us address these border energy issues?
Well, as I said, okay, so the first one. We talked a little bit earlier before you came, I think, but that a lot of the water pollution problems stem from the fact that the water pollution control law is not being enforced. I mean, local governments, like my example is, you are a wastewater treatment plant. You're the local official. Why do you turn her off sometimes? Why do you turn off your wastewater treatment plant? Maybe half the time. Why would you do that? Why would she do that, you guys? Because energy is short. And if I'd rather give it to my widget plant who makes stuff and gives me money on the side, you don't give me nothing. You just treat waste, right? So I mean, China's got, sorry. There's always someone has to be my wastewater treatment plant. So again, a lot of it, the local, not to blame them all, but this problem is less of a problem on the East Coast, but it's moving west as the dirty industries are moving west as well. Local governments don't have they don't have a lot of development choices, and it's like, well, I want my widget factory or my wind farm as opposed wastewater treatment. I mean, they are treating about 70% of their waste, municipal waste now. But again, factories the same thing. Given the choice, we're short on energy. Are we going to make our stuff, or are we going to treat the waste going out? We're going to make our stuff. Because local environmental protection bureaus are small, controlled by the local government, and don't have much money. So the watchdog isn't watching. I mean, that's like a general overview of like why the pollution problem's bad. There are a lot of Chinese NGOs, and so I mean your big question is like a whole lecture. I mean, China is really there's a lot of political space and a lot of experimentation, both in not just the NGO world, but in the policy realm. Universities, I mean, there's a lot of talk, the awareness of the, environmental problems. The water energy issue, I'm trying to raise the awareness, and I'm creating a U.S.-China water energy team, and going to be doing more meetings in China to try to create partnerships between U.S. There are people like your husband that does shale gas and water. There's no one in China that's doing that, and that trying to help build the capacity among practitioners to work in this area. So I'm just me, but I don't know. I have a big network, and just giving them the idea. I think we're wrapping up because people got to get to class. Any last question? I do have my card. Make sure you get my card. Would you like to join my mafia? I have to have you. Yeah. So, thank you. Thank you.